Started. Hey now, and how are you doing? Want to welcome you to the next episode of Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat. Today we're bringing on my friend Kurt, man. We are going to talk about a lot of different things about mergers. We're going to talk about leadership because leadership is always the most important thing, but also, how we scale because Kurt is actually known as the king of scaling companies. So I can't wait to talk to all hail the king. How are you doing today, Kurt?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, thank you for agreeing. And I looked at your profile and I was like, man, this is going to be an interesting time talking about leadership and scaling. No matter where you are, I think you always are in that scale moment, and you always want to keep growing, right? You're either growing or you're dying. Why don't you introduce yourself and then we'll start getting kicked off.
My name is Kurt Uhlir. I'm a former big company, like multi-billion dollar company enterprise guy. Helped take a company public for $880 million, and then we later sold it for $8 billion. That was fun. Stayed there for 10 and a half years. We started writing a bunch of angel investment checks and got into the earlier stage realm and realized, wow, I could take these playbooks that I helped build at big companies and then bring them into smaller companies. And the startups was a little bit too small for some of that. But I really kind of found my way both while I do keynotes for those smaller companies. I'm often at companies that are 10 million to maybe 200 million that are wanting to add a zero in the next couple of years. So
Mm.
true scaling, not just real growth. And I have advice for people that are growing. And there's times you need to think about growing and what does that look like. But to get the best growth, you also need to think about what does a true scale look like. What happened if I gave you 100x the number of customers? Most things are going to break in your company, whether it's a five-person company or a 5,000 person company.
Yeah, that's what it is. Part of scaling is knowing, right? Everybody wants to scale. Everybody wants the bigger numbers. All companies, no matter how small your company is or how large, you're always thinking about scaling, but it's also
Yep.
doing it properly, right? It's not just, as we talked about before, it's not just bringing on live bodies and you'll just fill the gaps. That's actually where you cause more gaps. What would be the first step or the first idea when you want to start to scale that you would suggest?
The first thing for me is usually starting to identify what you're wrong about actually in your business. And so, no matter the size company, I mean, I just say that we're all as leaders of businesses, whether SMBs or $100 million company, we all have, I think, at least three things that we're fundamentally wrong about in our business today that we think we're right about. And you may not actually identify those today, but you need to start changing your mindset so that you're starting to look for these and sniff them around. And more than that, you're starting to let anybody that reports to you and your team realize that, hey, there may be things that I hold very strongly that I'm realizing I could be wrong about. And I would rather
Mm.
you give me insights to that today, next week, next month, so that we can figure it out in 6 months as opposed to 2 years, which is kind of an average. So I found by bringing this framework in of that core mindset shift, I can usually help uncover, at least for myself and a lot of the companies I'm with, things that otherwise would have taken us 24 months of running through operations. We can bring it back to by 18 months to figure out in 6 months, which means in the course of a 2 year period, we've now gone through 8 to 10 months of growth and figuring out major shifts.
Right. Yeah. Once you're able to do that shift really quickly and identify it, because I've read plenty of books, and true leaders really want to look at 6 months increments. You might have a longer term plan, but you have to look at it because you don't want to wait 2 years to see how the plan is implemented and then realize you've gone off course.
Yeah, that's that first thing in the mindset shift. The second thing is, I think everybody, to your point about 6 month increments, everybody has to force their thinking and their team into three different time frames. And I'm not like legalistic about what they are, but for me, it's 12, it's 2 to 12 months, 12 to 36 months, and 36 months plus. And now, to your point, tactically, we can look at 6 month increments within there, but you have to separate to these three big things and force your own mind. And I mean, by all means, like put on glasses if you need to be like, all right, I don't wear glasses normally. And when we're talking about the short term, I'm like this. And when I put these on, we're thinking about like that 12 months to 36 month. And then like, do you put on a ball cap when you're talking about 36 months plus? Lets everybody in the room know what you're talking about. And part of that thinking is not just the initial mind shift, but that second way of that framework about thinking and things, to your point, there's always some number that you should be thinking about, things you put in place today that's not going to pay off for 36 months. But
Mm.
when you're segmenting that out, it could be 1% of your business, it could be 10% of your business. But when you're segmenting that out, you realize then that, well, in the short term, we tend to look at lagging indicators. What we want to do is look at leading indicators and only track to those. And we need to agree to them up front so that in these 6 month increments, we can look at the leading indicators to know, are we still on path to that 36-month plan, or do we need to adjust accordingly and not be like, well, sales haven't gone up. Well, we weren't doing things for that long-term investment, intending sales to go up today. That was a leading indicator. We should be tracking something different on.
Right, and you have to make sure you understand what metrics you're pulling in, right? If
Right.
you're just looking at revenue, well, there's a lot of reasons how you can move revenue without moving anything else. So you need to make sure you have those really right the KPI, KPIs, the key performance indicators
Yeah.
on what's moving to kind of have your barriers to keep you along and keeping you honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And like even if you're able to jump between those, and I find a lot of leaders are able to jump between those timeframes in their mind. I find most teams either are not capable of that because those of us that have a few more years are used to this jumping through strategy wise. Like with your experience in more enterprise companies and coming down doing coaching, like you're able to do this. But I find so many people then that would report to us, they're not able to do that. Or even though if we jump too quickly, like if we're in the same meeting, even talk going from that short term to the midterm to the long term, no matter if they hear that we actually want to make different investments in those later time frames, what they're actually hearing is hit the short-term numbers or my job's in line. No, like that's a reason we want to separate out those time frames so that even if it's in the same meeting, the first 30 minutes we'll talk about the short term, that 2 to 12 month. And then you pause it and go, great, we're agreement on that. We'll come back to it when we need to. Now we're going to talk about the next time frame. That's giving permission to your team to say, look, you're not going to get fired if by if you're doing the right things for these other two time frames, but we need to make sure we're addressing them at this time frame. Because even though you may be intending to give them 10% of the budget for that midterm, 2% of the budget for that long term, if you jump between these, they're only going to hear short term job
Right.
security.
Right. It's all about them, and that was where I was leading with one of the questions is how do you push out that vision, right? Especially when you're looking for scaling, right? People get scared. I mean, again, I've rode the corporate scaling where you're like, okay, somebody has to leave, right? But they're not just going to absorb a brand new company, or there's two ways to look at it, right? So you want to have the internal messaging to tell your people, don't worry, right? So I remember being in a meeting, and the general counsel at that time was like, well, it's going to get rocky for the next couple of months if you can't handle it. And I'm like,
Right.
and then he was gone by the end of the day, which was really funny. But it was, a situation where you're like, all right, you can't handle it. That's not assuring. How do you have that vision to share the scalability, but also to kind of get your people to be a little calmer and
Yeah.
you don't see people jumping?
I love that question because, and I think you may be the first person that's asked me is a question like this in a way that acknowledges that people bring on the PTSD from other companies that also will impact things where they're at now. And so we've almost all of us, I've yet to meet somebody who has never worked for the company that has a mission statement, has a vision, has a culture on the website, but yet internal acts completely different. And so since we've all worked for something like that, even me, and being the type of person I'm going to talk about here, there's still, if you and I are on the same team, something's going to happen and it's going to trigger that PTSD from some toxic environment I was at. And I'm gonna be like, oh, and you're going to have to help me kind of like coax me through that at times. So how you help your team, acknowledging that we all come from that background, there's three things for me. First is most people, even if they're nice, I actually find are authoritative leaders. So underlying is that do what I say and the way I say it, the time frame that I say, or you're fired.
Mm,
Now you can be really nice, but the problem is we like and that's the authoritative leader. It also usually means you're a little bit more the micromanager, so people aren't bringing you everything, but you're also only seeing a small percentage of the actual decisions you want to weigh in on because they're not letting all that information come out. So I
right.
think the first part is you shift to being a servant leader. And when I say servant, it's not like the books from the 70s, and it doesn't disagree with that. But the servant leader, from a binary view of an authoritative leader to servant leader, says the moment that I've hired you, I'm hiring you because there's stuff on my table that I don't want to do. And so I don't actually hire you to do actions though. I'm giving you tens of thousands of dollars every month for you to reach business outcomes that I want. So my job then is to figure out in any moment, week, quarter, what can I do to serve you to get the business outcomes that I and the company wants. So the first is a leadership mindset. The second is then, and it goes with that, every single person in your company, whether a 5-person team or 5,000-person company, you as an executive coach, me, somebody who steps in as a new CMO, we should be able to go to anybody and say, hey, what is the business outcomes that they are wanting from you that's going to drive the company forward? Because most people will repeat back basically what's on their CV. They'll report back like the actions. Those are not business outcomes. And so your team likely can't do that. I've yet to step into a company where even 50% of the people can tell me the business outcomes that the company expects from their job.
Sure.
And so you're going to have to slow down and put that in place. And then the third part of that is, to your point, like the vision, mission, how do you get people to come on to who you actually are as a leader, the stuff we just talked about, which you actually want out of the company. You have to be transparent about where you have failed.
Mm.
So your experience in corporate, we know in corporate, hey, conflict is actually can be toxic and they thrive in it some cases. I want healthy conflict, as do you. We want a bias towards action. We want people that have a strong opinion, but they hold it loosely. And the other things you would see in people's actions. Well, that's going to be on the website. That's in a lot of my job descriptions. I'm going to talk about that. But the problem is, we've all worked to your question, we've all worked in toxic environments where somebody said that. So the only way your people are actually going to believe you is when you fail at those cultural things, the vision things that you're telling them that you want, is to say, hey, look, it's on the website on onboarding. I told you, like, it's on the website for you to hold us accountable. And what I realize is this just happened, and I didn't have strong opinions held loosely. I didn't have healthy conflict. I had toxic conflict, and I'm going to tell you about it. So like I've been at public companies where I go to my whole division after getting permission to
Yeah.
share where I didn't have that, and you share that with the 60 people in that division, the 600 people in the division, and you share your failings or somebody else, you bring them up to kind of share that. That's one of the first time that people will actually start to believe that the words in the website and what they heard in onboarding is real. So to get the first two things we wanted, you have to, and it sucks to do, and you'll feel horrible doing it, but you have to share, here's where I failed, where I'm telling you people, this is what I want. I didn't exemplify it well. Only a few people saw it, but you all need to know about it because then they'll start to believe it. And so both they'll start to get the vision more, but when you do that, all of these other things will come up too. Like after that meeting I mentioned, I did that. And within 24 hours, 3 people, only one of which worked for me, came to me and said, yeah, I have something just like that going on. And some people it was them, some people somebody else, and like, I don't know how to deal with it. Well, shit, this stuff was happening the day before the meeting.
Right.
You only felt safe coming to me because you believed me in that moment. Some of those people had worked for me for 2 years at that company. One it was only about 6 months. And so those three things are what you really have to do to kind of help to shift and get people on board with this is the vision. And we do things here differently, even though we don't do them perfectly.
Yeah, and one of the things that you love that I understand exactly where you're going, but where you said intentions held loosely, I love that you said that a couple of times. Could you explain that? Because I know so many leaders, especially when you're a leader, right? You have to make a firm decision. You have to be hard, but sometimes like in Star Wars, man, right? You grip too tight, they all fall through your fingers. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's harder for those of us that have been really successful before as well. And so it's worse in the environments where you have like a CEO, they've been successful once, and maybe this is their one time because they think they're smart and they've got it. Like those of us that have done around a number of times, we failed enough times, we realized I might not have it. And so expressing to your team two things. One is, hey, there is value very often in making a quick decision and going with it. Patton saying a bad decision, or an average decision implemented vigorously is much better than the perfect plan done later. That's true in most business environments. So tell people that. Some cases we just have to make a decision. I'm usually going to try pushing those decisions to my team. But the second thing is I'm going to come with really strong opinions, and I try hiring people that they have Supergirl, Superman stories in certain things from their background. I expect them to say, this is what we did and it was well. But they're going to know very quickly, do not bring me a problem unless you have a solution. It does not have to be the right solution. But also like if you really believe the solution, I need you to come with why you think it's the right solution, but be open to me changing my mind. I'm not going to just necessarily believe you. There will be a time where I opt for to that first thing. We need a quick decision. I'm not on board, but I trust you. But especially the more money, the bigger part of our business, uh, especially if I have a different experience, I'm going to expect you to prove me different, which means my proof points, the way I've done this before, I'm going to hold it loosely as well. But I'm going to come to you and be like, I've tried that and it failed. Here's why it failed for me. Tell me why it's going to be different this time. And I'm going to be really clear. That means you need to let me change your mind, but I'm also open to you changing mine.
Which is really great. To me, that's great leadership is just having that flexibility. But how do you also take into account that some people just operate differently, right? You have people who are hyper focused or focused differently, especially in today's world where people work from home. I was one of those guys who I'd get up early. I know you said you get up really early. I could do more. Some of my best work was done between 6 and 9:30 when I got distracted from all the people starting sending emails when they got into the office, and then that's why it's interesting. So how do you balance that when you're looking to scale to make sure your team has a little bit, salt and pepper, right? A little bit of each one to have that type of, push and pull. You don't want to have a team that's all yes people, and you don't want to have a team of people who are just thinking closed-minded.
Yeah, great question. I think there's a couple different things. And so I think, I mean, whether people are in the office or they're fully remote, I believe in fully remote partially because I just believe in hiring the best people. And there's so many people that I could never pay to bring in office. They have special needs kids, they're in elder care, like whatever that is. Like I want those people to be able to be on my team if they're the A player. And so, but even if you're in the office with me, I still will know more of about what's going on from the project management tools, whatever we're using to track, than I will from going by your cube. And so the first thing for me is move a lot of those conversations into something like a Dart AI, which is like a more modern version of a Trello or Asana.
Mhm.
And so that you can go ahead and put up there, here's the discussion we need to have, here's the project things. We can asynchronously add feedback into it, and then we can schedule actually meetings for that. And so the first thing is like there's a lot of that. Like I love having some of the more recent chat tools. Like there's a tool named Verbella. It's kind of like avatars.
Mhm.
Um, but it's like it's amazing. It seems weird, but like people are hesitant to hit video on Slack when if you were in the office, you come by and talk to me. But this little avatar you can walk up on the screen over there, people will just they'll do that no problem. Um, but I want to instill the conversations. And so for me, asynchronous tools is the best way. Forgetting whether it's overseas, it's like I'm on East Coast, you're in San Francisco. Like, how do we have that conversation over 2 days? We'll do that in something like Dart AI. But then the second thing is schedule meetings and tell people two things. One is this is what we're talking about. And if you're setting it up, you need to come with an agenda or I won't accept that meeting. I'll just tell you. Part of that agenda is this is the decision or the outcome I want out of this meeting. So it could be a product decision, could be a marketing decision. The purpose of the meeting, though, could also be it's a brainstorming meeting. At the end of this meeting, we will have a list of ideas that we will then later come back to decide on which ones we're going to pick and why. That's an outcome. But I will not accept a meeting if, on a team that I'm running without having that agenda up front and the outcome that you expect from this meeting.
Right, you have to be able to know if you're scheduling a meeting, you have to know why you're meeting it. You're not, that was where it was very frustrating. We had kickoff meetings where it was just a big party, uh, you know, but as long as you have an outcome or an explanation of how you're going to walk. A kickoff meeting there were some helpful kickoff meetings because you just you walk them down that idea. But when you're scaling, um, so when you scale, obviously there's the due diligence pieces. Uh, the whole gathering, right? It's like we do with our kids.
Yeah.
Dad, can I borrow the car? Yes, but where are you going? Who you with? And all that stuff. When you're scaling, what are the biggest pieces of due diligence that you would recognize for like a smaller company, to make sure that they kind of nail down?
Yeah, for smaller companies, so some of it is like being ready for scaling, and I push a lot of smaller companies to hold back from. I have them think about scaling in terms of what ifs, not for them to scale, but for them to get growth. The only way you're actually going to hit 10%, 25%, 50% growth year over year is by pressure testing a system at 200%, at 500% growth. And so anticipating, hey, we're not going to grow. We're probably not going to grow at 200%. We're probably not going to grow at 500%. That's true scaling. Companies where, I'll help take the company from 85 million a year in revenue to like a billion plus in 10 years. That's a hyperscale kind of situation. 25% year over year is not scaling to me. It's growth. It's good growth that you can do. And so the way you do that is you start going through every part of your business that says, what happens if like this input goes up by 3x or 10x? What happens like from a marketing perspective? Like some of it is, it depends on your marketing setup, but it's like, what if we need you to drive 5x more leads? And not through ads, because like that's just that's something that's shuts down when you shut off the spigot. Go to sales. What happens if I actually give you 10x the qualified leads, not the junk noise leads, and you actually work through that process and then take it to onboarding, take it to product usage. And when you walk through that true scale concept, you start to uncover so many things that will break down. Some of it may be the system doesn't handle it. Other cases, the system is the person. Well, we have one onboarding person. It's a small company. And when Amanda goes on vacation, nobody can fully cover for her. And so
Mm.
you're like, okay, then one, we want Amanda to be able to go on vacation because we don't want her to burn out, and she'll be more effective. And then so I go, well, how do I document what she's doing? And so that's where AI does help a lot now to start to document these SOPs and keep them updated. In the past, I would hire somebody for that, like in customer success. My third or fourth customer success person, part of their job wasn't just to be another rep. It was also to document what everybody else was doing so that they could all take vacation. So that I could step in as like the general manager of that subsidiary and step in and be like, look, if you go on vacation unexpectedly, you got hit by a bus. I could pick up this Google Doc with links to other things and go, I could cover today. Like that's the level of documentation you need. And if you don't have that, well, you're not ready for 25% growth, much less a 500% growth.
Right, and that's great advice, and I hope everybody really heard that because as you want to scale, everybody talks about scalability, everybody talks about this, but you have to be prepared that you have the systems. I mean that's where if you don't have the systems in place or the people in place to do that, again, Amanda's going on vacation. Okay, well, that week we can't grow. You have to have a little scalability. Obviously, if Amanda's allowed to go and should go. Especially in today's world, we
Yeah,
want to have more input in our families and things like that. But how does that flow through? So knowing that you have to kind of test it, and by testing it is by just growing a little bit and seeing where that becomes the real scale, the opportunities,
right.
right? So again, having those indicators where you can then scale in the business.
Absolutely. Well, and it's also one of the things where I find you bringing somebody like you, like as an executive coach, helps so much. Like we're all capable of going through all of the major segments and subsegments of our business and ask these questions. But we're so busy running our business, even if we're quote working on the business versus in the business, we're still so busy with other things. I find we just can't actually do what I like to call like I need looking out the window time. And
Yep,
so
100%.
so you might be able to segment that, do the Bill Gates thing where he disappears for a month every year, just to, before where he just go read books. But most people aren't able to do that. And so by bringing in, I think it's actually two things. By bringing in an executive coach who's done this for other companies, one, they usually, like you, will have a framework to help go through to ask these pressure testing questions. And so they'll bring a framework. Two, they're going to take time on your calendar that's going to force some looking out the window time. That's going to be more efficient when it gets done. And then three, as a business leader, there is something that really to be said that says like, I'll always put off stuff, but the moment I write you a big ass check to come in and do this for me, I'm now like that. I'm now invested that part of my company so that I will actually protect that part on my calendar, which I should do anyways. But it's like it's so valuable just for the first two pieces, your framework and being more efficient in the time. But it is that third thing I find where I've done this for companies as well, where it's like, no, at the end of the day, them having written the check is the emotional bit that got them committed to the first two pieces.
Yeah, 100%. So everybody doesn't realize it. When I talk about it, and I have a background in mental wellness, and everybody wants mental wellness, but nobody knows how to get it right. I don't want to
Right.
spend the time. I don't want to go to therapy. I don't want this, and that's where when I talk to somebody, I'm like, just tell me your problems. I go for right now, that's where I always start off. Like, where are you on your baseline? Where and what is how is that affecting your business? Are you, short at times when when the crunches are on? How can I teach you how to manage some of that? Train you how to go through that a little bit differently.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think like that's the biggest thing for me where it's like it like you could do this yourself. And I think it's
For
important
sure.
for somebody to acknowledge partially just so that they'll move forward. Because staying where you're at, you're not gonna get a 25% growth. You're never gonna get a 250% year-over-year growth. I mean, I've been blessed to be able to do that many, many times with lots of companies. But to acknowledge you could do this, you are capable of it, but also acknowledge you're not going to do it. To your point, like kind of being healthy. Like I am healthy. Like I know I don't always love the gym, but I also know I'm the guy that goes to the gym as soon as it's open, no matter where I'm at in the country. But I still have like a functional health coach for because like part of that is I need Paulo to show up and ask me questions sometimes so that I'm actually going to just like I've got some accountability there. Well, you could do this yourself. I could do the health bit myself. No, you bring in the executive coach. They probably are better at from a framework perspective than you are, but you are capable of it. But you're not going to do the work, and that's okay because you're running a business.
Right, and that's where you have to honor that time, or even think about that time. That's where a lot of people go, yeah, I'll get to it when I think about it. With health is a perfect example. I'll get to it when but then you have a problem,
Yeah.
and then you're like, oh, I got to think about it now.
Well, and I'm also everything you said, yes. And I'm also both like on the health side as well as where like I've hired executive coaches in addition to being one. I know by having that on my calendar, even where I think I could completely do it. Like I've had executive coaches that are not as capable as I am. But I still brought them on because like one, there's always valid
Validity.
conversation that I get things back and forth. But I am much more efficient preparing for that meeting. So even if I would have taken an hour to sit down for it, because I'm going to have to walk through it with somebody else, I get so much more accomplished walking up to that meeting. So I'm prepared for it. I'm better walking in with my functional health discussions because I know I'm going to have to walk through. Here's what I'm doing, where I actually sit down and go, okay, here's the supplements when I've taken. Here's my streaks about how much I've been to the gym. And by sitting down and doing that, I can review that in like 8 to 12 minutes as opposed to just having it running around in my head all the time. And so it's that preparation for talking it through with somebody else. And then if that other person it has any value whatsoever, it's just better, even better. And of course, like you're only going to hire an executive coach who's good. But just that preparing is going to make you better at this work yourself.
Yeah, and it's a different preparation, right? Because when you're going into it, by that accountability, by that person showing up, they're also going to see things differently,
Yeah.
and that's what we need at times. I mean, no matter what, scaling or anything in our business life, you have to do that, right? It's just always good, right? Why do you go out with the guys maybe for a beer just to kind of talk about it and things like that? The kids are going through this, teenage, I have teenage girl, well, they're not teenagers anymore, but teenage girls, I'm like, oh my God. And you talk to other men who have a girl who have lucky enough to be girl dads, and be like, oh, I'm also going through that. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, it's not me, right? It's the
Right.
validity of that.
Well,
Because I think
I would add to that for anybody in your audience that's listening, if you're an entrepreneur or you run a small business, yes, this is important for you, but especially as you start to get up to 25, 50 people on your team, you have people that are leading other people, you should think about bringing on an executive coach, maybe not for as long as you might yourself, but you should start bringing somebody on to do this for the people that are reporting to you. You have somebody who's running sales and marketing, go find a fractional chief growth officer, a fractional CMO, and not to hire them as a fractional CMO, but to be the executive coach for your head of sales and marketing. You're running a software product company, same thing. You have a construction company. Hey, go get somebody that's been in your role that could be you, maybe somebody that's you that's even retired to step in and do this for your project manager so that they're doing some maybe instead of maybe not one-on-one, but if you've got two or three project managers, you've got a decent general contracting business, we'll put them together and bring somebody on for almost like a mini Vistage group just for them. Your business will grow from that, all bringing somebody else in to help them pressure test their systems.
Yeah, no, and it's that growing with sanity, right? It's that again, that idea that you're doing it, not just saying, okay, we're going to do it or leave it. But it's in the vagueness that employees don't like it, that's where they
Right.
start thinking, they start filling in the the X's and O's in their own way based on their background, rather than keep communicating it and showing, and us as a corporation showing their worth to what we think of them by having an executive coach or somebody to be there. I mean, that's why our offsites are always right. Productivity always goes up after an offsite or a retreat, not just because of the vacation, but because you then have that worth. You could see the company cares and goes back to.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, I will also kind of add back to what we were talking about before about get people on board with the vision of the company, the culture, what you're trying to do, how you want things to run. By all means, reward people for good, like for the positive things. And these are still positive things, but like that healthy conflict, it's not easy for most people. And so, hey, bonuses when you hit sales targets are great. If you want to really change things, start to reward people for that behavior that's that difficult but hard. Somebody brings up, hey, you didn't handle this well, and I want to bring this to your attention and see what's going to happen with it. Send that person a $200 gift card for them and their family. Better than that, if you know they love barbecue and they live in St. Louis, find them and give them a gift card for a specific place in St. Louis. Like give them something unique to them. I did at this one company. This was back before like the CNC machines were quite everywhere, so you get custom engraved like cutting boards. But it's like you had to have strong, healthy conflict, a big pushback against either me, no matter who you were in the company, or your direct manager. And when I found out about it, you got this massive engraved cutting board engraved with your family's name. You got to choose exactly what you want on a couple of designs. The only way you got that was showing strong, healthy conflict. And it just started to kind of bubble up. We didn't tell people about it, but it's like the people when they that happened, well, like somebody opens up this box in their house and they have this like massive cutting board that's got like Euler, my last name across there. And there's a note about, hey, I really appreciate you calling me out and holding me accountable that I didn't show up the way that I needed to. I really appreciate that. This is for you and your family. That person is a new employee forever.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, well, that's what I always say. The last supervisor I had, and I had him for a number of years. I'd run through a wall for him, and I told him, when they started doing the cuts, that's how I got out of corporate America. It was the golden handshake. I
Yeah.
go, don't worry about it. Jeff, it's okay. I saw how the stresses of managing and having to let go people every 3 to 5 years felt for him, and I said, don't worry. I know where I'm at. I'm good,
Right.
and you know you jumped with no eyes, but it was because I knew my confidence, but I also knew when you have a boss that will go the extra mile for you, the boss that will lead and have that's part of the important, because that's why when you mentioned about servant leadership, right? That's why servant leadership really does outperform every other management style, because you're there with them. You're not
Right.
there at them, or pushing it down in the valley.
Absolutely. And with those timeframes we mentioned earlier, when you're actively talking with the people that work for you that says, look, I'm acknowledging that there's three different time horizons. I'm acknowledging that there's outcomes I want from you, and my job is to help you reach those outcomes across each of those three timeframes. You also have people starting to think, oh, David cares about me not just what I do today, but next year, the next 2 years, even though you might not be at the company either by either side of that equation's choice. But it has people start thinking about, okay, well, I you're wanting maximum output from me over these different time frames, which also means, well, when somebody gets thrust into elder care, when they have a special needs kid, when their spouse comes down with cancer, well, in most companies, especially nowadays, people start freaking out about their job. I can't tell anybody at work that my spouse has cancer because my productivity is going to go down. I got thrust into elder care. Like, well, here's what happens. If you get thrust into elder care, you're going to have like 30 to 90 days that suck. I just say that of somebody who's been
100.
put in it multiple times, been happy to do it, but there's no way when you're starting to take over full-time elder care for somebody that's now in dementia that you didn't know that beforehand. There's a lot of work to be done. Doesn't mean people don't show up to work. Doesn't mean but it also means you want that employee to say, look, I want the outcomes from you out of 3 months, 6 months, 12 months that you work for me. Come and tell me the moment you find out about those things so we can figure out how to help you and help the company in the short term. Because 60 days is a short term for an employee over a year. You have a best performing employee, you would be okay with them not showing up for 60 days if you got the rest of their output for an A player for the
Right.
rest of the year. But they're not gonna, they're still gonna show up for 60 days. You just need to give them flexibility. Servant leadership says, I'm wanting these outcomes from you over the year. Come to me the moment you find out about it. Hey, you and your brother are discussing who's going to take mom. Well, you choose when you bring that to me, but my employees are going to bring that to me very quickly because they're going to want me to know this might be happening.
Yep, 100%. Right, but you was and that's that fair conversation. It's all about communication and having those open levels of that because that's really, I guess, what servant leadership is in a high performing company. Than rather just being a nice boss, right? A nice boss. How would you define the two?
You can be a nice boss in other ways. I just like I'll kind of go back. I think too many people complicate leadership. There's either that authoritative leader, which is usually telling people the individual actions to do in the time frame and the way to do it, or the outcomes based. And so you could change servant leadership to just say the outcomes based, and my job is to help you reach the outcomes that I want. Well, the authoritative leader, which is telling the people exactly what to do in the time frame, both of these people could be really nice, but underlying it is if you don't do exactly what I say in the time frames that I'm wanting, you're gonna be fired because they're caring about the actions being done, and usually they're short-sighted. They're also like they don't realize it, but like usually, even if they're super nice, the authoritative leader usually walks in having most of the answers. They don't realize it, but their teams are hiding ambiguity, uncertainty, or especially problems from them. And so that's kind of the separation, though. The authoritative leader, though, you can both be nice. Some of the nicest bosses I've ever had were truly authoritative leaders that only cared about how many emails did you send? How many marketing qualified leads did you send at the end of this week? Like if you didn't get in your weekly report, well, I'm sorry, you might get let go. What do you mean? We've been killing the quarter. We're on track to have the best year ever. Well, you didn't do your weekly report. Well, that's the authoritative boss. The servant leadership says, like, I care about the outcomes. What's going on?
Right. Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, what happened? What happened?
Yeah.
Because that's part of that. Well, I guess as you're starting to scale, as you start identifying employees' strengths and weaknesses, what have how do you kind of identify the people who might just not cut long term, who still might help you short term, but as you scale, this is as good as they can get. They're great performers, but they're not going to be able to hang around when you scale and work becomes look differently.
Yeah, great questions. I mean, if somebody is a good employee, there's usually going to be a room for them on my ship. They just may not be getting better seats on the ship, so to speak. Underperformers are a different circumstance, but so like even with that, as being the servant leader, the outcome performant person, we're having conversations from day one. Every one of our meetings is going to be these are the outcomes we're wanting. Here's what I'm thinking I want you to do, but if there's a better way to reach the outcomes I want from your role, bring those to me. Well, what I'm doing from that is I'm continually bringing back to you. Here's the outcomes the company is trying to reach. Sometimes those are far reach goals, and sometimes they're just things that we're expected to do. But I'm being very clear what I'm expecting from you. What happens very quickly is people hold themselves accountable. I'm a firm believer anybody says you bring accountability to an organization doesn't know how to lead. If by the time I'm bringing accountability in, that's already a performance review. The person's probably out the door at that point. And so, but when you're setting those outcomes that the company's trying to reach and what I'm expecting from you, well, you're either going to show you can reach them. And if you can do more, you're constantly looking for, I know you said this was the outcomes you want, but that's what you said the company wants. Can I do these other jobs? You might be a new leader in a new position coming up.
Sure.
But if somebody, let's just say, is a really good customer success person, by having those conversations, what you're going to quickly identify is this is all they're going to be here. Something might change, but unless something drastically changes in their performance, they're great. Our customers are happy. Churn is down low, but I don't see them doing more. And the
Mm.
reason I like that customer success example is I had a woman work for me at a family office back company that was a single contributor, individual contributor, customer success rep. And she moved from that to leading a team, to leading a bigger team, to then being selected by me to be the business unit manager because she didn't know it at the time, but I knew we were going to divest that company from the public company. And so I literally had stepped out of every part of the business I was doing, um, and gave it to her for the last 6 to 9 months just for her to run it. And to your point, she identified early on every one of these steps. She was always looking for more things to do.
Mm. Yeah, right. That's what it is. It's just identifying, and sometimes you need to step back to see it, right? That's why I like to sometimes be that fly on the wall. You get to see a lot more than by being in it, you know.
Yeah, but I have no problem with some, like if somebody can't cut it, by all means, I will show them the door. It's never going to be a blind side because I'm going to tell them these are the outcomes I'm expecting and you're not reaching it. And I'm going to try different things. Like as the sales rep, like I might step in and maybe I just have a different way of doing it, or maybe my way really is better. Well, I'm going to take, if you're not hitting your numbers, well, I'm going to take a day or two and I'm going to take the next 7 calls and you're going to listen. You're going to then, we're going to walk through that. I'm going to train you, and you're going to take the next 4 or 5 calls, and I'm going to help. And then the next 4 calls, I'm just going to listen. And then you're going to do the next 4 calls, and afterwards, I'll give you notes. That's part of coming shoulder to shoulder, trying to train the person or have somebody else do that. And at the end of the day, they're not cutting it. Well, it's not going to be a shock to them when I say this isn't the right role for you.
Right. Yeah, right. You've already led them up, you've educated them, and some people, right? Your level is no matter how many lifts and weight, weights you carry, some of them are just not going to be able to ever go there, right? I had a friend who, no matter what, I could have taught him and spent hours to try to teach him how to hit a baseball. He wasn't going to hit a baseball if he fell out of a wall, you
Right.
know. But so,
Well, and with that, I find often when you step down and it's not a shock to the person that this is not a home for them. One, it's very clear to both of you that this is not the home for them. But the second thing is you usually know what they're really good at, and so it is not rare. This is never a promise. So anybody that's working for me now, or that ever listens to this in the future that's working for me, it's not a promise. But when I let people go, I'd say somewhere between 30 and 50% of the time I call somebody else. Sometimes the employee knows it, sometimes they don't, and go, "Hey, I'm having to let Bob go. Here's why I'm letting Bob go. He doesn't work here, but I know your organization. He would be incredible, I think, at your organization." Now that doesn't always work out, but like we have a little bit more, a little bit less of this now. But like pair programming used to be a thing where programmers would work together. Well, some people can make the change to be an individual person, or now kind of everyone's a software architect. I would hire people that thought they could make that change, and it didn't work. But they were a great pair programmer. They would do well when they were being trained. So I've had to let those people go. I've called other people and said, he's incredible. It's not incredible here because I don't need pair programming. That's not our style. But like our head of engineering said he was great for me. You should interview them. And that person picked up a job before they finished our job.
yeah, which is again being leader and also being connected. I mean, because you do that. So do you apply so that because we have a lot of different listeners. Do you apply that same servant leadership, in principles in both, your life as well as your business, or is there a different way to look at things?
Yes, I tried to at home, although my wife might disagree somewhat on that, especially at different times. But yeah, because I think it's also one of the best ways to in your personal life. I mean, I look at things where too, it's like I lead marketing and sales for large companies. They said, 10 million to 200 million, and they're wanting to add a zero to it. And yet, what does my 6-year-old son see? He sees that I'm serving, not leading in any capacity, our local trail life troop because one of the things I'm hoping he will pick up is, hey, when there's work to be done, Euler's help. We don't stand around. I'm hoping he sees that to like what being a good follower looks like.
Mm,
Those aren't things that I could tell him. Like you can't just have a culture board at a company and walk that through. He's going to pick that up because I know the outcomes I want from him. He doesn't quite know that necessarily yet, but he's going to know that, hey, dad's doing shoulder to shoulder time with me so that I could pick this up as well. Is it always fun? No, but like I'm stacking chairs not because I'm loving it. I'm stacking chairs, in the auditorium
it needs to get
because
done.
the organization needs it. And ultimately, I'm not trying, I mean, I am trying to help the organization because I like it, but I'm trying to use Trail Life as a means to raise a man, not to just hand my kid off.
Right. Yeah, and that's that active, right? That's active listening, active participation. Kids see everything, and that's really one of the things. Now, as we get closer to the end of the episode, I always have somebody walk into my magic garden, and you know, but to plant one more seed. You've given us so much advice and during this episode, and if you could have one more, it doesn't have to be one. I'm not going to hold you to it, but one more seed that you can plant for us today. What might that be?
I get a lot of pushback. I do keynotes around the world on leadership and creating high performing teams. And when I say servant leadership, I get like recoils from people at times because they think it's all about empathy or they think it's going to slow down my growth too much. And I'm just going to say it's the exact opposite. I say both, and for both of those, it is by far, if you give me $50 million to go start a new company, I'm going to start day one in my hiring and my implementation with servant leadership because I will grow faster and more resiliently, so less risk for the investors with a servant leadership style than the other way. On the other side, empathy is not it is not the number one characteristic of a servant leader. A servant leader cares about outcomes and discussing that and being transparent. Empathy is just a tool. Empathy can be toxic, just like a hammer is a great thing, and it can also be a weapon. And so empathy is just one of the tools in your toolbox.
Right, you're right. You could be empathetic, but sometimes all that becomes really soft, and not because you care, not because rub it off the old metaphors that they use in society, but empathy, you could be, caring, but you're not if you don't have a vision, right? You need to
Right.
see that vision. You need to know where you're going, and that's really where servant leadership is. I don't have to be the guy out in front, but I know when you get lost, you leave everybody else leading at times. But when it's my time, we know where we're going. We're
Right.
following my vision.
Yeah, I mean that fits with it too. Is like, and I hear so many people, especially at smaller companies or companies that are smaller and wanting to grow fast, and they talk about a family. No, it's not a family. Don't say that. Servant leaders don't say that because servant leaders, we do care about the outcome. We care about serving the person. In some cases, just like with a son or daughter, some cases it takes tough love. Some cases it says showing the door there for an employee. And so you do not fire your brother or sister or aunt. And so your company is not is not a family. And the better thing, it's a professional sports team. So if you're caring about the outcomes, you're caring about building a legacy for the company and the people there, and then to be better players. Like, no, that means you're caring about the outcomes. You're talking to them about what you're wanting. It doesn't mean that you're going to fire them. They are not your aunt.
Right. Yeah, no, I remember when rotisserie started and the fantasy and stuff like that. I won a couple of leagues and I traded every player I had, and they're like, "What do you mean you traded every player? How can you trade all these players?" I'm like, "Well, they fit a need, and I knew where I needed to go, and family, right? You wouldn't fire well, you could fire your aunt, but that at that moment your aunt is an employee for the company,
Right.
not your aunt."
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what is the thing I would say, like, especially a lot of like, entrepreneurial companies, a lot of times we do have families that work for us. And I would just say, especially if you're sharing leadership roles, or maybe even more so if you're not, you have to figure out a system to deal with work things from family things. I ran a business, I co-owned a business with my brother, who's 18 years older than me for years. And we kind of came up with this thing initially that said we had three like brother tokens. And there was three collectively, so he could use all of them, or I could use all of them in a year. And that was basically when something came to a head that was so bad and an impasse in the company because we have very different communication styles, very different approaches to business. One of us could just say, "I'm using the brother token," which was like, "That you win. Shut up. There's no more decision. We're going my direction." So you also didn't want to pull it out because, like, if you pulled that out, well, he might use it the next time. Well, we had to do that because until we did, we had kept having these issues where at work we were doing this, which is fine in some work environments. It was fine for our work, but we were not brothers outside of that. And we had to have a way where we still acknowledged, no, here we're co-owners, not brothers. And in that case, I'm going to put my trump card down, so to speak, so that like we need to be able to separate out, just like we talked earlier about the temporal things. We needed to separate out family versus work at times.
Yeah, that's another seed, and that's so important because especially in smaller companies when you might be hiring family and being able to understand the difference. When you walk off the ball field, using that, like I used to play football with a lot of my friends. Those pickup games, and on the field, man, I don't care if we were drinking and you're my buddy, you're my ride. Uh,
Yeah.
if you were holding the football, you're going down, and vice versa. But once we get off the field, You want to go for a beer? No problem. And some people don't understand that, how
Yeah,
to kind of compartmentalize that.
yeah.
Okay, so I just want to say, as we're rounding up the episode, we're going to end it. How can people get in touch with you, Kurt?
Come to my personal website at Kurt Uhlir, uhlir.com. I write a lot about servant leadership and some of the growth and scale things we've talked about. Or if you want to see more of the personal side, it'll send you to Instagram and you can see me drive around in my emotional support skid steer with my 7-year-old.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and it was a great episode for me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay. And everybody, I hope it was a good, great episode for you as well. And I hope you have, as always, peace and love in your life. And as you're doing that, make sure that that's always your foundation. Reset yourself and move forward. And when you're bringing your bat, bring those awesome thoughts like we heard from Kurt today and knock it out of the park and hit your sweet spot. Thanks so much.